Hi, I'm Calvin Monarch, and I read the book In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. The book is a nonfiction story, and it's retelling the murders of a family in Kansas. The book is told from an outside narrator, and it's third person omniscient, and the narrator is retelling the story. A summary of the story is the story starts with the narrator giving us setting and some facts about Holcomb, the town of where the story is located. The narrator also talks about the moments leading up to the murder of the Clutter family. Then the story jumps directly after the murder, where the bodies are found by neighbors and friends of the Clutter family. And then the story goes through the moments after the murder and what the murderers did, and kind of the very beginning of the investigation and the little evidence they had. And then the story follows the murderers all around their travels. They were right after the murder, they took the things they stole from the house. They stole some personal belongings and some money, and they used that to get to Mexico, where they were planning on spending the rest of their time. But that quickly didn't work because they ran out of money and they couldn't find a high-paying job down in Mexico. So they came back to the United States, and in the United States they started in Florida, and then they couldn't find any high-paying jobs, and so they eventually went back to Kansas to try and bounce checks to get money and get by. And they were planning on leaving Kansas right after. They were just going to be there for a day to bounce some checks and get some extra money so they could hold by until they could find a job. But that ultimately got them caught because they let the cops know that they were in Kansas, and it made it a lot easier for them to catch them. And then the story reflects over the murder and the trials, and it kind of talks about how the murderers were examined by therapists and trying to see if they were mentally stable, and it turns out they were. So they were given the capital punishment by the jury, and they were sentenced to death. They were going to be hung, and it talks a little bit about they had multiple retrials, and it took a long time before they were actually hung, and they ultimately did end up being hung, and it was kind of tragic because they both changed towards the end of the story and realized what they did was wrong. For some character analysis, Perry Smith, Dick Hickok, and Alvin Dewey were the three really main characters of the story. Perry Smith was one of the murderers of the Clutter family, and he never had a good home life, which ultimately ended up with him bouncing in and out of jail and had him kind of mentally unstable because he was attacked by his father when he was young, and his family was never truly there for him very much. And I have evidence for that on page 273. Mom and Dad began having quarrels. I remember my mother was entertaining some sailors while my father was away. When he came home, a fight ensued, and my father, after a violent struggle, threw the sailors out and proceeded to beat my mother. I was frightfully scared. In fact, all us children were terrified, crying. I was scared because I thought my father was going to hurt me, also because he was beating my mother. I really didn't understand why he was beating her, but I felt she must have done something dreadfully wrong. And then the book showed kind of how mentally unstable Perry Smith was, because directly after the murders, it talks about Perry and Dick were kind of joking around, and they weren't really acting like an average person would after killing a family of four, which no average person kills a family of four, if I'm being honest. But it kind of showed how mentally insane they kind of were. And then he did ultimately change throughout the book, because right before getting hung, he apologized for what he did and kind of asked for mercy. And I have evidence of that on page 340. It would be meaningless to apologize for what I did, even inappropriate, but I do. I apologize. And then the next character, Dick Hickok. Dick was a perverted man and fantasized about young girls. He was less crazy than Perry, but he wasn't truly stable. And he also comes to end up that he actually never killed anybody. He was just there. He was planning on just robbing them, but Perry ended up killing one of them, and they agreed that there should be no witnesses, so they had to kill the rest. And I have evidence of this on page 230. Hickok said, Perry Smith killed the Clutters. He lifted his head and slowly straightened up in the chair like a fighter staggering to his feet. It was Perry. I couldn't stop him. He killed them all. And then towards the end of the book, he talks about his perverted fantasies and how he's ashamed of what he was and what he did. And he ended up wishing he wasn't a pervert, and he really hated himself for it. And then he ends up thanking the men for catching him and hanging him to end his kind of misery. And I have evidence for that on page 339. It says here. Oh. There we go. It says here, where did it? Hickok nodded. I just want to say I hold no hard feelings. You people are sending me to a better world than this ever was. And then, as if to emphasize the point, he shook hands with the four men mainly responsible for his capture and conviction, all of whom had requested permission to attend the executions. This kind of shows how Dick changed, because it shows that Dick ultimately ended up being ashamed of what he was. And earlier in the book, he seemed proud of how he was. He seemed like he was proud of what he did. And then at the end of the book, he kind of realized that it was truly wrong, and everything he was doing was wrong. And then for the last character, I have Alvin Dewey. He was the main agent in the capture of Perry Smith and Dick Hickok. And towards the beginning of the book, he was very work focused. The case kind of made him exhausted, and he smoked a lot of cigarettes. He also didn't see much of his family, and he focused all of his attention onto the case, which kind of was hard on him. He ended up being really tired. He fell into the cigarettes. He fell to addiction, and it was ultimately really hard for him to stay focused on the case. He was constantly thinking about it. That was all he had on his mind, was trying to find the murderers. And there's evidence for this on page 148. It was Saturday. Christmas was near, and the traffic crept along Main Street. Dewey, caught in the traffic, looked up at the holly garlands that hung above the street, swags of gala greenery trimmed with scarlet paper bells. It was reminded that he had not yet bought a single gift for his wife or his sons. His mind automatically rejected problems not concerned with the Clutter case. And then towards the end of the book, he spent more time with his family, and he was less exhausted and worried about work less with the case being over. He ended up kind of releasing all the bad energy, and he kind of focused more on his family, and he ended up being a lot less exhausted, and he ended up being really good at his job, because he got that done and it helped him get promoted. And then for literary techniques, I have foreshadowing of Nancy Clutter's death using her diary and how it talks about her future that never ends up coming. Before saying her prayers, she always recorded in a diary a few occurrences. Some are here forever, I hope. Sue over and we rode babe down to the river. Sue played her flute, fireflies, and an occasional outburst, I love him, I do. It was a 5-year diary. In the 4 years of its existence, she had never neglected to make an entry to the splendor of several events. And this kind of just, it kind of helped foreshadow the ultimate death of Nancy. It showed that she was kind of looking forward to the rest of her life, and she never really seen it coming, and no one really did. And the diary kind of shows that it was unexpected, but it kind of gives you an idea of what was going to happen. And then for another literary technique, I use symbolism. And for symbolism, I had that the Clutter house symbolizes the American dream, because the Clutter's house was a very large, they were pretty rich, they were wealthy, they had a large farm, they had orchards, they were very, very far off, they were doing a great for them, and this kind of just showed that the American dream was in the book, and the Clutters symbolized it. And I have evidence for this on page 9. For several years, he had slept alone in the master bedroom on the ground floor of a house, a 2-story, 14-room frame and brick structure. Though Mrs. Clutter stored her clothes in the closets of this room and kept her few cosmetics and her myriad medicines in the blue tile and glass brick bathroom adjoining it, she had taken for serious occupancy Ivana's former bedroom, which, like Nancy's and Kenyon's rooms, was on the 2nd floor. This kind of just shows how big the house was, having 14 rooms. And it was also on a giant plot of land where they had animals, and they were very wealthy, and it symbolized the American dream to me.